I just think there is very little actual fact in our lives at the moment, very little reality. This is real, our conversation is real, but what's going to happen in an hour or so? You will have your version of events, I will have mine, and they will both be different. There will be a chaos of memories, misinterpretations, lateral connections, and they will all be a fantasy. No, in fact, everything that you hope for and dream about, that's all a fantasy. And the layers of associations and connections that every second your brain is making as we navigate this world, it is all just a fantasy. And yet it seems as real as the news on a screen, the sound of this table, the people we love. And that's why I think it's very important to deal with this definition of fantasy in our lives.
Welcome to the culmination of 44 years of misery. The official Dave Pybers podcast. Life is a hideous thing.
Is it possible to popularise and instate into society the idea that life is just a dream? It's an idea that reeks of delusions of grandeur, ego inflation, and an exaggerated belief of self-worth more likely due to excessive death anxiety. We lie to ourselves every day about how well we drive, how good we look, how much we enjoy ourselves. Self-deception is now a fully accepted norm. We are living our own dream in the confines of a conscious lifespan. Thus, life, for some anyways, is possibly just a dream. How far has modern society strayed from the ideal of real happiness, now only measured in the GDP of human-made factitiousness and consumer goods, and headed by the self-informed collective known as the World Wide Web? I argue the disastrous impact the internet is having on all our lives, through the rise of the big data companies who increase their attempts to monetize almost every human activity, to the general dumbing down of the daily feed my ego content and the acceptance of a wiki-led version of unresearched knowledge. The battle of determinism is often contrasted with free will.
You're being deceived. 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 You're being deceived.
I'd like to welcome Dave McKean to Life is a Hideous Thing podcast. And were you ever a fan of H.P. Lovecraft?
No, not so much. I've read the odd bit. I much preferred Edgar Allan Poe and Franz Kafka and more those other more psychological things. I thought H.P. Lovecraft was a bit silly, but I read the odd thing. Yeah.
Going back to read Lovecraft again, I find his stuff very undeveloped and kind of childish. But he wasn't published at the time, so I guess he didn't have that pressure to write a bestseller like Stephen King might. You know, it's like there's no pressure. So it remains kind of undeveloped. The reason I ask is because the name of the show, Life is a Hideous Thing, which sounds a bit cynical and negative, but I'm not really like that. All my friends think I'm a miserable bastard, but I'm not really. It's just a front, you know what I mean? But so yeah, I noticed you. I mean, this is all, and after working on the record covers, we kind of lost touch, and you went off and did your thing. And so only recently, when I wanted to do this Peaceful Days podcast with My Dying Bride, did I start researching what you'd done since then. And I was very impressed with, you worked with the Rolling Stones and Tori Amos, and I found that you were a musician as well. I didn't even know that. Yes,
not really in the rock area, but yeah, I used to play in bands when I was a teenager, and then and played at jazz festivals, various things, and then I just got really busy. It was my life choice really to get to really follow up on the band stuff and try and get a record deal and do that, or the art and design illustration that I loved. So I thought, well, I could probably go to art school and keep the bands going in the evenings. And I did that for a little while, but then it just got too much, and I just got too busy. Once I left art school, I got very busy very quickly. So the music became really just for me until I started making films, and then I got music back. So I could start to write music and work on scores for the films.
How do you find working in the sort of film business?
I've made a bunch of short films and 3 feature films, and done a little bit of work on the outskirts of the actual film business. And, that's okay, but it's a bit of a big machine. And I'm not sure it really makes the films that I really, really am interested in trying to write and make. So I've tended to just take, when an opportunity comes along, or if I have an idea for something and I think I can do it at a low budget and maybe find a budget somewhere, then I'll do those things. But I'm not out all the time pitching or trying to, move to Hollywood and get a career as a director. Film is a part of my expressing my world, and I managed to do that through books and writing and music and various things, and film is part of that.
So going on from that, that's where I got interested in your angle on, well, not life, but, how your art can maybe influence what you're trying to say about the world. As I got older, I got more cynical about particularly the internet interfering in people's expression. They seem to dumb down a lot. I'm sure you don't partake much in Facebook, for example, which I found Twitter to be way more informative when a situation like the comet landing was happening, and yet nobody on Facebook, for example, seemed to be bothered about anything but posting pictures of cats, which I just don't understand it sometimes. And then you were talking about, like, in some of your interviews, like how reality versus fantasy. I found that very interesting, because I find that people on the internet can live this life through a fantasy. They build up their own network of friends who basically agree with everything they say, and if nobody does, they get rid of them, so they don't come up to anything that's out of their little dream bubble.
Well, I've started to see a lot more articles being written, films being made about the implications of the internet, because obviously it's been such a huge change. It's happened so quickly. It's been almost an evolutionary change in the way we deal with each other. The implications are still being felt, and I don't think we know what those are. And I know there are lots of positives. People find a lot of good things about the internet. It certainly allows you to find things quickly, and there's a vast amount of information out there. But it also comes with a negative, and I think those negatives are a bit, along those lines that you're talking about. We do tend to accrue around us like minds with like opinions, and everything on the internet is geared towards what you've liked already, satisfying that need, rather than showing you things that you've never seen before. This great god of choice, and not, choice is in one sense wonderful, but on the other sense, we tend to lazily choose the things that we know we like already, rather than be inspired or forced to try other things that we may change our minds, become more and more insular.
I think my fascination with keeping a diary had something to do with, there was a part in your film Luna where the guy was sitting there talking about how everything's fantasy. Like 2 people are talking, and then an hour later everything's kind of changed and memories become blurred. Now, my fascination with a diary was, like, you could write a diary about doing this and I could write mine, and in 100 years' time one's destroyed in a fire, for example, and then the people find yours and read it, and that's the opinion of what really happened, and it's just an opinion or a version of reality. It's not actually real. And I've been fascinated for a long time. I'd like to write a book about 2 people who do the same things but have their own opinions, and then it's the world in the middle that meets. What is the real bit that connects them? It's just an opinion, really. It's kind of a fantasy. I became very interested in that. I'd like to use a clip from Luna to start the show, where he's saying that little bit. It's only about a minute long.
What your memory is actually slightly out of focus or slightly misremembered, and then like a photocopy machine, it just degrades. And as the years go by, you're remembering a memory of a memory rather than the actual thing. And then it's startling if you manage to prove that happened or didn't happen. Maybe it was filmed, or maybe you do read a diary entry, or maybe you bump into somebody who was there as well and compare notes to see how much your memory has drifted. And you're absolutely clear in your mind that this happened, but it didn't. Or it didn't happen in the way that you feel that it did. And then you've really got to look at the certainties that we carry around with us, and the fact that, they are a sea of memories and misremembered things, and relationships between different events that have happened swirling round in our brains. And all the time, I think you've just got to take a step back and say, well, I do think this is true, but there is a chance, so I've really got to listen to this opposing opinion to see if I'm really right about this or not.
Did you ever personally keep a diary?
My work has become my diary to a degree, and it's in a way it's a very unreliable diary because it's not very good on absolute facts, but it's very good on feelings. So I can look back on the work that I did on record covers or the comic book covers that I did, because that was a monthly gig. Every month I did a comic cover for Sandman, for example. I can look back on those and I immediately can remember where I was and what time of day it was when I was doing it, and the music I was listening to and the things around me. And all of those feelings come back very clear, because when you draw something, you really, really pay attention in a way that you just don't if you take a photograph of it or look at something for a short while. You're really attuned. And for some reason, you also seem to be attuned to the environment around you. So that's been as good a diary as I've had. Really.
I think when I joined a band and we started putting out records, I probably did the same. I stopped writing a diary, because every gig you played had a poster with the date on it and where you were. So you could roughly remember something. And, each record, like you say, each piece of work you had, brings back definitive memory. Whether it's correct or not, I'm not sure.
Well, it's absolutely correct. I mean, that's the trouble. It's a sensation rather than a crystal clear paragraph of text that you can clearly see as being, a factual version of what happened. It's much more a sensation. But I don't mind that, really.
Something else that you said that I really liked was me being a northerner, a worker, and all that out-of-date bollocks. You referred to not normal people, but you called them real people. And I'm not sure how to, on the show, you'd type out some notes, and I'd say, artist Dave McKean. And I noticed you didn't like to be called an artist. You were called a worker, because your art was your work. And yeah, I really liked that breaking down of, because people fantasize about being a musician, and they fantasize about being someone who does artwork for covers. They build up this dream world, and they seem to cancel out all the work we do. It's your life. You dedicate your whole life to it.
Yeah, I've become sort of rather touchy about the word artist, because I really don't know what it means anymore. It seems to have been, it's one of those words that have been relativized out of all meaning, like celebrity and genius and one or two others. I don't know what these words mean anymore. I'm happy to be an illustrator. I'm happy to be a comic book drawer or illustrator. I'm happy to be a photographer and designer and all these things, because they factually explain the jobs that I'm doing. But an artist, I think, well, for starters, you've got to define what you mean by that. And I've got my own definition of artist, and I use the word to describe a few people, but it is only a few people. It's the people that I think have created the language of art at the avant-garde cutting edge of it. And that's very few people. It's a qualitative term as far as I'm concerned. So anybody who comes up to me and says, hello, I'm an artist, I'm sort of immediately suspicious of. Probably unfairly, but I can't help it.
I never considered myself to be a musician. I don't know why. It seemed to attain some sort of importance in life, and I was better than everybody else. And I was like, okay, I wasn't comfortable with it. I was a bass player in a metal band, and I toured around a lot and drank a lot of beer. Whether I was a musician, I'm not really sure. So how am I going to introduce you as an David?
I don't know. I try and avoid this kind of stuff, really. The Italians have got a great word, which is creativo, and we don't have an equivalent in England. So somebody like Federico Fellini, who was a cartoonist and a writer and a fashion designer and obviously a filmmaker, was a creativo. He just did different things. He was a creative person who expressed himself in different ways. So that's what the English language for once is lacking. It needs a word like that.
Me and Pat Mills found a word that we had a problem with in English that didn't have enough meanings, and that was the word hero. People seem to throw the word hero around a lot without really understanding the factual evidence of what is a hero, like a superhero. I mean, they don't seem to do much in my eyes. But what is a real hero?
It's another one of those words, isn't it, that's just lost its meaning because it's been applied to everything.
I wasn't into ever being called a musician, and for some people they'd say, "Oh, you're my hero." And I was like, dude, seriously, I'm really not. I'm a normal person, and I'll speak to you in that way. And that was very difficult for them to speak to for the first 10 minutes because they were probably shitting themselves for a start. But afterwards, they actually thanked me as it was the best conversation they'd ever had with someone like me. And they were very thankful of it. It was something I always pushed, and some guys from the music biz thought I was breaking down the magic too much. I was being too real, but it's just the way I was. I couldn't help it.
Well, yes, that's good. I think that's admirable. And there's a lot of rubbish around the art, the mystical side of it. I don't really hold with that. It is but at the same time, to really do it, to really play music, and to really express yourself with a drawing or a painting, and when you really get it right. It is a very special thing. It's not a mystical thing or a supernatural thing. It's not something that makes you any better than anybody else. But when it works, my God, it's a really special thing.
It was definitely a love-hate relationship.
Yeah.
It was something that you feel from your heart that you needed to do, and then you needed to get a lot of money out of that sometimes to live. Not a lot of money, but you know what I mean? It was like you had to make a living out of it, and that seemed to curtail any special feeling eventually. It's now just a business for me, and it's one of the reasons why I wanted to get out of music particularly. I wasn't enjoying that side of it anymore. It kind of killed it. And me normalizing my life even more, like getting a new job with local people. I'd never done that before because I've been traveling the world for like 20 years. And it was very interesting to sort of bring myself right down again to earth. And I don't even have a passport anymore, which is ludicrous because I used to for years have two. We were travelling that much, we had to send one off to an embassy somewhere to get the visas, and so you'd still have to be travelling. It was chaos, absolute chaos. So all this thinking of mine's, I've started reading a few books, and then I found that you'd worked with Richard Dawkins.
Yes.
And when I started doing my podcast, I watched some tutorial about how to do it, and they said make a list of people you'd like to speak to. Doesn't matter how famous they are or who they are. And I think Richard Dawkins was one of the top people on there that I always wanted to speak to about whatever. And when I thought you'd worked with him, I was like, wow, all these things seem to connect. And I read you worked with Grant Morrison.
Yes.
And I obviously did Pat Mills on the podcast just before you, who was linked with 2000 AD and Grant Morrison. And I spoke to Pat about Hitler visiting Liverpool.
Yes.
Which has never been proven, but it was in Grant Morrison's comic, which was then, it's not been published, I don't think, for a while. I think it came out in Crisis. I think it was called The Adventures of Adolf Hitler.
Yes, The Young Adventures of Hitler, something like that. It was very controversial at the time, yes.
Yeah, so there was, all this was kind of linked. You worked with Grant, and then you worked with Richard Dawkins, and I thought, I've got to get in touch with Dave. This has gone on too long. I've always wanted to chat to you about the old record cover stuff. But this seems to be like interwoven with what I was like researching. It was crazy. So I was very happy when you agreed to let me chat to you, because this kind of shit bugs me. I don't know why. Whether I actually get to speak to Richard or not, I want to pick up a few points of my own with him. Whether he'll give me the chance or not, I'm not sure. I did watch a film that he's done called The Unbelievers.
Right.
I watched that on Netflix the other night as a bit of research, and I can't believe the size of the audience he's talking to now is just unbelievable. He's like bigger than fucking Metallica.
Well, he's become the centre, the locus of attention for, these a cohesive series of thoughts about what it is to be an atheist and what we're actually saying and dealing with in the world. And there's obviously different people have slightly different views about it, and particularly about religion and how they feel about that. But I personally like Richard's scientific, clear line in the sand views, and it always surprises me how people appear to have a view, if they don't agree with him or they don't like him or his manner personally, they build a version of him that I don't recognise, certainly not the person that I knew, and then criticise that rather than actually criticising Richard himself and what he says. So he's a strange phenomenon.
I think it was like the cult of personality has started to not affect him personally, but started to affect, like you said, how people see him. And if I ever met him, I'd like to present him with a T-shirt, for example, that said Richard Dawkins is God. The only difference being that we can prove that Richard's real. And I don't know if he'd be offended by that. It would be kind of like a parody, because I think to atheists as a whole, he has become like this, like this huge person. They clap and love it, and they don't question him anymore. But as a layperson on the subjects that he's talking about, I very admire what he's doing, and I do think he's doing a good thing, especially where it's introducing new ideas to school about not sort of getting kids into believing in religion from the bat. Teach them about it, but don't force them into that. I mean, I think maybe yourself went through a schooling of that, and we've come out better for it by being exposed to it. I'm not sure how everybody takes that now.
I think it's when religion wants to get its fingerprints all over the science classes is when we have a real issue. I think there's no issue with teaching religious history and a history of the different religions, because it's hard to understand what's going on in the world if you don't know about that stuff, and it's hard to appreciate a lot of literature and references in world culture if you don't know that background material. But it's when religion starts, especially, well, it's more prevalent in America, but it's also in religious specific schools in England, when belief starts getting into the science class. That's when we have a real problem.
I noticed just before coming onto the chat, your website suddenly appeared to be working.
I know. I've had it sitting in dormant state for years. I intended to do it, obviously, and then put a fair amount of work into it. And, life's just too busy, and it was very boring typing all these things in and putting up pictures. So, and I've never really needed it. I don't feel like I need it particularly. So it's just sat there dead in the water for a few years. And then, so finally, I'm going to try and do a Kickstarter thing and a couple of other things where I was thinking, well, maybe a website actually would do me some good. So I finally got it, finished it up, and to a point anyway, and it's now live at least.
It looks nice. I was surprised because I'd looked at it a couple of times thinking, I guess I didn't know if it was actually you that was doing it or you had a friend helping you or something that had lost interest. And then I don't know why I clicked on the link again tonight. I'd kind of run out of links to follow, and I clicked on it and it was like suddenly active, and I was like, wow, I don't know how you must have found time to do that, because it's...
Yes, only today it went live. So.
Oh, wow, awesome.
Yeah, and did you play it? You can play little notes at the front if you put the mouse over each of the things. There's a strange blown metal pipe sound that comes up, and you can play a little tune on the opening page. I don't know how many other websites allow you to do that.
Well, the first thing I did when I went on it is mute it, because I was scared it was going to fuck with my recorder. I don't know why. I remember Geiger's website used to do that. You used to scroll over the alien head and it used to scream. Yeah, that was particularly cool. Were you ever into Geiger as an influence?
Oh, yes. Yes, I did like Geiger. And I did love the Necronomicon pieces that he did based around New York skyscrapers and all of that sort of stuff. And of course I like the alien design. So, I mean, just a complete original, I thought he was.
I think as a record company trying to get, an artist involved in a metal band, I think Geiger was probably the A-lister. And I do know some guys who managed to do that when we were working together back in '91. Carcass managed to get Geiger to do a cover for them, and we were so jealous, and we were like, how the hell did you manage to afford Geiger? Because he'd done Alien and everything. We just thought he was like out of this world, and they just said, oh well, it wasn't that expensive, but it was incentive based. If we sell over 200,000 albums, we have to pay him a little more money. So they were kind of hoping that they weren't going to blow up overnight, and I don't know, it was kind of a weird double-edged sword for them, but I was very jealous. I've always loved his artwork, and I was very sad when he passed away. I don't know what he was working on at the time, whether he was actually productive or not, I don't know.
He had his own museum, and I think he was still creating work and overseeing that. But it was awful. We lost 3 or 4 extraordinary artists from a similar era and a similar area of work. Mobius died at the same. Did you know Mobius? John Giraud did a lot of comics, amazing comic artist. And Patrick Woodruff died as well. He did a lot of record covers and various things. So yeah, really sad.
I'm sure you haven't got time, but if you ever went to my Twitter page, I don't tweet unless it's someone's died.
Oh.
And I obviously have to admire the person and be interested in them. I can't post everybody. Like I didn't put Peaches Geldof, for example. She did nothing for me. But like, you can read my Twitter account, and it's just like a graveyard of famous people. It's quite sad because you think, wow, I guess as we get older, it's going to become more and more and more. It's sort of growing every day. You wake up thinking, who the fuck's bought it today?
I know. The through pages are becoming very depressing, and the dates when they were born are getting dangerously closer.
How do you find aging? Is it good?
I'm not happy about it.
No. I don't know. I seem to think now I'm older, I seem to I'm slower and more patient, and I'm a bit more content, and I'm not that worried about certain things that maybe when I was 20 I was very angsty about, and I wanted to get a name for myself. And now I'm actually trying to break that down by, I don't know. I've had a real struggle with fame. It was not something I intended to do when I picked up a guitar at 16. I didn't intend that, and you do get edges of ambition. I'm not saying when my chance came I didn't jump at it, and that could have been more to do with the fact that I was on the dole at the time and I had nothing going, and when someone called you and said, do you want to go on tour with the band, you'd be like, oh okay, you've got nothing going for you. So it's more opportunistic than maybe an ambition. These last few years I've had a real struggle with fame. I'm trying to break it down all the time. I don't want to be famous anymore. I wasn't born famous, so I've seen both sides of it. I've seen being anonymous and no one talking to you, and then being famous and people talking to you, and then now I'm not famous, it's gone back to people not talking to me again. And I'm very interested in that, how fame, it's a weird sort of analysation of why that is. All it is fame to me is someone's looked at you more than anybody else. And you could say that with a painting, what makes it famous or what makes it people want that. It's because basically people have looked at it more. That's it. It's not better or worse, it's just more famous. So I'm I'm trying to figure out these things as I get older. I'm sure I won't get anywhere with it. I think that's half the point, is there is no point. And once you accept that, it's quite interesting.
Well, I mean, the only use I've ever had for having a name that's known a little bit is if somebody else whose work I really like has seen mine. So it's a shorthand and a shortcut to saying hello and being able to talk about interesting things with people. That's all. That's the only use I found for it, really.
Maybe that's where I'm going to do well with this podcast, because if you Google my name, you'll see a Wikipedia page. It's like having a CV online. Are you legit? Are you a freak, a weirdo, a serial killer? You kind of validate yourself.
Yes.
Maybe that'll help. I think as the podcasts get more and more guests and shows on there, people will think, oh, he's reliable, he's nice to chat to, he's interesting, he's got something to say. Because I found that the new medium of podcasting is already being abused by certain people. The fact that they just talk about complete bollocks to themselves. They don't even know if they've got anybody listening. And for me, I want it to be more informative, I want it to be more researched and maybe going somewhere. So I'm trying to do something a little bit more intricate with it, and I think the fame bit might actually be of use to that initially. I'm hoping in a year's time people might actually write back to me on the emails I've sent them. I'm finding that to be a real struggle at the moment, is to try and get people to actually respond.
Yeah, people are busy.
I know, and it's difficult to sort of step back from step back, don't quit just yet. Give them chance.
Well, you'll probably find when you've done a year or two's worth, I don't know how many you've done so far, that the story of what you're doing will emerge when you look back, and you'll start to be able to plan it, the second chapter moving forward once you've made sense of the first chapter looking back.
An interesting kind of angle, because I've never really thought of it like that, so that's kind of helpful. Yeah, maybe people will see me as an antagonistic nihilist who's just a pain in the arse, and whatever he's going to talk to you about isn't going to be easy. Because I don't want this to be like an interview. I want it to be like a chat, but it's like an enlightened talk where we're not just talking about football. I find, like I say, I've struggled with the internet and people's way of using it. I like to use the internet, but I don't like it using me. I think that's always been my point. Maybe in a year's time I'll know where the internet's going as well. It'd be easier. So.
Yes, I have a feeling it'll be rather longer than that before we actually see what the damage that's been done, as well as obviously all of the extraordinary connections that have been made. I really think there's a downside as well as an upside, and I think it'll take time to really come home to roost, as it were.
Yeah. So I've seen some of your interviews are at like Comic-Con and conventions. How do you find doing them? Because I've only ever been to one convention before, and that was a guest to Doug Bradley, because he did a lot of narration on our records. Right. And when we were playing a show in Baltimore one night, when he was doing a convention in the same town, so we went up to see him, and that was awesome. But that's the only time I've ever done a convention. How do you find those?
The comic conventions are pretty samey. So it's nice to do the odd one. It's nice to meet people. But it's not really what I do. I'm not particularly good at it. I'm much happier working, and I feel that my obligation really to my people who buy my books and things like that is just to do more books really, and to make them as good as possible and to spend as much time on them as I can. So I'm not good at touring and doing lots of personal appearances and signings and things like that. And unfortunately, the comic conventions are rather monotonous. It doesn't really matter where you are in the world. They look and smell and feel about the same. They're usually in a big, open, industrial space that could be anywhere in the world. All the stands look about the same, and I'm signing the same books and answering the same questions. So it does get a bit monotonous. The film festivals that I've been to have been quite different. They've all been really individual and unique, and you get a sense of the individual person who has curated it and shaped it. And they all have a different priority and they're in very, very different locations. And so, I guess a lot more imagination has gone into the film festivals than comic book conventions. And generally I much prefer to go to those because I'm inspired by them. It's great. I'm inspired to go, but then the place and the people there just give you so much back. So this sounds like I'm dissing comic conventions. I don't mean to do that, because I've certainly enjoyed a lot in the past. But I think anybody who's been to a lot, and anybody who works in comics and has gone around the world to different comic conventions, I'd be surprised if they would say anything different to that. They are a bit samey.
I could compare it to maybe going on tour around the world 10 times. People, my friends would say, "Oh, you've been to Australia, you've been to Russia, you've been to South America. What's it like?" And you were playing in a dingy, smelly venue, surrounded by fans, so you couldn't really go anywhere. And you're playing the same music in the dark. After a few beers, it all became like the same thing. After a while, it didn't really matter where you were. People say, "Where's the best place to play?" I'm like, "Well, everywhere. It's all the same." And it breaks down their magic. They want you to say like, "Oh, LA's the best," or Brazil or somewhere. And it's like, no, it's all a rock club, and it's all pretty shit, really. I mean, we weren't ever that big, so we were averagely playing 1,000 people a night. So do you play live still?
Well, I've kind of got back to performing, and it's taken a long time. But I was invited to do a show in Australia. So I put together an 80-minute kind of one-man show, really, although I had with me a string trio and a trumpet player and a percussionist. And then I made films and animations to project behind me. And then I sang and played piano. And it was called 9 Lives, and it was 9 different stories. 6 of them as songs and 3 of them as narrated stories, all with live music. And I absolutely love to do it. We did it at the Sydney Opera House. And so I've been looking around for more opportunities to do that show. We've done it in England. But also I'm working on a commission at the moment from the Manchester Jazz Festival, Literary Festival, to do a different show. So we're doing that. I'm doing that with Ian Bellamy and an amazing band and a poet called Matthew Sweeney, and we'll be doing that in August. And then possibly something next year with a string quartet and Neil Gaiman. So we'll see. The performance thing has become really interesting. I love playing. I get very nervous, unfortunately, so I try and do local gigs as well just to get over my nerves. But apart from the nerves, I really love it. Really love it.
People always ask me, like, how did you deal with, like, playing shows and, like, with nerves? Because some of the gigs we did were, like, festivals, like Download, where it's, like, 50,000 people. And obviously we were nervous because we were technically, walking a tightrope where everything could just fall apart in a second. So we were nervous on that angle. But as far as playing a gig, I was never nervous. I get nervous doing these because, again, I want it to go well. I don't want to waste people's time. I want it, them to kind of get into what I'm saying, so you do get nervous about it. I fucking hate the nerves. I don't know why. You think at my age and all the experience I've had, all the shows, I wouldn't get nervous with anything. Maybe going to war would just be the only thing, or maybe having a baby, which I can't do, hopefully. Not yet, anyway.
Well, I quite like that sort of slightly edgy nerves, because I do a lot of talks as well, and that's different. That's a slightly edgy nerve that sharpens you up and makes you alert and ready to deal with any questions and things that happen in the crowd. I like that. But when I'm playing, for some reason, I've got this thing where my head just sort of fills up with white noise and I can't think what's next, and I make stupid mistakes. So I really, really hate that. And the only way past it is just to rehearse and rehearse and rehearse and rehearse and force myself to become almost, completely programmed to do this, and then I can try and improvise on from that. But I've got a really solid, rehearsed spine of a performance there that I can fall back on.
If it makes you feel better, some of the shows we did, we used to, in between songs, we used to turn us back on the audience so the singer could talk, and the guitarist next to me would say something like, "How does the next song go?" And I was like, "I don't know." It wouldn't trigger your memory until you heard the first note. But if you had to hum that to someone on a desert island the next day, your mind would be a complete blank. It was kind of funny because there'd be 1,000 people thinking, "You guys rule," and you're thinking, "I don't actually know what I'm fucking doing right now." I don't even know the next song. It was kind of scary, and we've had some funny situations happen where we all started the next song a different one. For example, bit of a nightmare. So rehearsing. I think that was the key. Is rehearse, just nail it.
You've got to.
So right, well, thanks, Dave. It's been thank you for your time, mate. It's been a lifesaver, really, because the person I was supposed to do on the next podcast is they're on tour as well, and they've had to delay my recording by 2 weeks. Well, thanks, Dave. Cheers, mate.
Cheers. Bye bye.
I'd like to thank Dave for coming on the show. And you can hear the stories of how our relationship began with the record covers we worked on the first of the Peaceful Days podcast series with My Dying Bride, which should be published sometime this month. Cheers.